Hey everybody, this is going to be a short little video, but if you couldn't gather from the last video, we are in the middle of a sock knitting knit along. Y'all know we like to do group projects, which have just kind of by default ended up happening in our Facebook group. But I know if you don't know me, you're probably clicked on this video because you're wanting to just know stuff about circular needles, so I will quit rambling and jump to it. So I just said circular. These are double-pointed needles. The reason I was talking about this with our sock knit-along is we have a lot of people, and we've been joking that it's like the what is it? It was the Great Twilight Division of like a few years ago where you were either Team Edward or Team Jacob. We have people that are we pretty much divided ourselves into Team Double Point, which is what you see here, versus Team Magic Loop, which my friend Dawn loves Magic Loop and she has some great tutorials on it. And I honestly need to give Magic Loop another try, but I never had because I used to knit a lot of hats, and so I just got kind of hooked on double points, and I feel like most people are now Team Magic Loop. So I felt like I needed to make a little video on why I love double-pointed needles and kind of some tips on how not to suck at them, because I've already figured that out because I made all these mistakes. Case in point being, this is my second run at casting on this particular sock. I had to rip it all out this morning, and I'm blaming it on trying to knit with my 5-year-old sitting on top of me last night, and so I admittedly made some mistakes. So my first tip is, when you cast on your double-pointed needles, make sure that you know how, if you're doing like long tail cast on, you will, depending on, you know, how good you guessed how much yarn you would need, you'll end up with a long tail, hence the long tail cast on. This go around, after I messed up, I made sure to break my long tail, because before this long tail was like considerably longer. And when you're first starting out with any project, and I especially feel like on double points, it's always, I don't know, once I get to about this length out, then I'm kind of like, all right, now we're like cooking with gas. But before then, it can be a little janky. And what I did, the mistake that I made, which is why I had to rip out and start over, was I started knitting with my tail versus knitting with the yarn that's connected to the ball, because it's really easy to confuse the two if they both seem like, if they're both long enough that, it's kind of going off your leg, then I started knitting and I got about 4 rows done correctly with the yarn, and then thanks to having a 5-year-old sitting on top of me last night, I got distracted, which you can imagine is easy to do, and I started knitting with the tail. And so then this morning when I picked it up and started knitting again, I was like, oh man, I knitted with the tail. And if you just started making that mistake, then, and this is correct, but if you realize like, oh man, I'm knitting with the tail instead of the, actual live yarn, you can always back I did this right, but pretend I didn't. If you just messed up by a few stitches, you can poke your needle back into the, stitch like that and kind of walk them back off. Like if I just messed up those 2 stitches, or basically as long as it's enough stitches that are just still on one needle, then you can do like I just was showing you and, back the yarn off, and then you can pull the tail out and correct your mistake. But if you were like me and you had a really long tail that you didn't cut and you made this mistake from like one needle onto the second needle, then I don't know, you may be able, I tried to walk it back and I just ended up with this weird loo. I was just like, this is bad. So I hadn't gotten that far into it. I always found that the tail, I had tail issues. I agree with you there. So I just had to rip it out and I started over, which is what motivated this video. So that is tip number 1, is make sure you cut your tail. And I even tied, you may not be able to see like a little knot in the end of this one, just to really remind myself not to knit with this. Because now this is short. I mean, I can't wrap it around my finger. So I hopefully will not continue to make that mistake. So that is the first thing I learned this morning. And in our group, we had people talking about it. It made me laugh. One lady said she thought knitting with double pointed needles was like wrestling an octopus. And I was like, man, it totally is like wrestling an octopus. And I made a joke that I was just good at octopus wrestling because that's what we called my oldest daughter when she was baby. She was like tiny and had these long arms and legs. And so she was like a little octopus baby and you had to wrestle with her. So I'm maybe just particularly good at octopus wrestling. But what you're going to do, so for this sock, we cast on 56 stitches. 56 stitches. And then you divide them evenly on 4 needles is what most people do. So 14 stitches on each needle. And you can see that that then makes like this cool square. But you're not knitting it like this as a square. You're going to be knitting it like as a diamond. So once you've divided all your stitches, and then in order to join it, you move one from this side to that side, and that side to this side, and then, on your first row of cast-ons, and then that way you end up with it this way. And like I said, the first couple rows, so I guess that's my other tip, and I will actually knit while I'm talking, is the first couple rows, and I feel this way about any of my knitting, but especially, I guess, with double points, is, I don't know, the first couple rows, like my cast-ons are always either a little too loose or a little too tight. So the first row or so is always a little weird. So my other tip is just kind of power through your first couple of rows without expecting too much perfection out of them. Because once you get past kind of the first couple of rows, then the tension kind of evens out, I feel like. So that would be my other advice is, don't get too hung up on your first couple of rows not being perfect. Because as you see, this was my cast on row and it totally looks fine now. So if I'd stopped and kept, going back and forth on the first couple of rows, I never would have gotten to the rest of these, which in my opinion look pretty good. There's not, sorry, this live video keeps not wanting to focus. Focus! But yeah, you have to get past the first couple. There you go. So don't get too hung up on perfection in your first couple of rows, and then you move into the rest. I feel like I have that same tip with spinning. Like the first little bit of fiber going onto your bobbin is going to be a little wacky, and don't freak out about it, and just keep going. So just keep going. That's pretty good advice for anything. So my next thing with octopus wrangling here, as we're referring to it, is as you're knitting, you're really just knitting from this needle and this needle are going to be the only two that are involved. So don't look at the rest of these needles. Just ignore them. And I kind of feel like I naturally kind of tuck them out of the way. And when I'm knitting, question, do you knit 2, purl 2 for the cuff? For mini sock cuffs, you would. For this particular pattern, it's just got like a cute little rolled cuff. So I'm just doing stockinette. So that's a super good question. So I feel like in most, you would either knit 1, purl 1, or knit 2, purl 2, depending on what the pattern was, or if you were making it up. This one has like a little rolled cuff. So I'm just doing stockinette. They're kind of like little ankle socks. And we're trying to do, like I said, a real beginner one. But you can see with my knitting, I'm just knitting like you would anything with these. And the rest of them are just kind of flopping around. So when I get to... So I think that's your other thing is don't think about the other needles. Just pretend they're not there. And you'll get kind of a feel for it, like I said, just like... I don't know, I usually do spinning videos. I feel like the same way you get a feel for spinning. Sorry, and the needles are poking at the camera here. And then when you get to the end of the row, just scoot it into the middle. And then you're scooting this one. So that's kind of my other thing, is you scoot it. When you're done, scoot it into the middle so your stitches are nice and secure in the middle. And then this is going to be my new active needle. So then I just scooted that to where they're closer to the edge. And I do knit continental, so if you don't knit continental, this might be a little weird. But then you get your yarn going here. And I've got this scooted to the edge. The rest of these, see how my yarn is all in the middle? I'm just going to kind of push those out of the way and flop them down. And that's how I do it. So everybody else might not do it, but I really make a big point to get my needles that I'm not working on, just make sure the stitches are in the middle so they're not going to fall off, and then knit this way. And the reason I like double pointed needles, and I'm sure other people have learned other ways on circulars or magic loop that they like better. I guess what I should say is what I don't like about circular needles when I was knitting hats, because like I said, I used to knit a lot of hats, was I didn't like feeling like, because on a circular needle, I'd be knitting, like probably more than 14 stitches, but then I would always have to get to this point, and this is what I think Magic Loop eliminates this problem, but I wasn't doing Magic Loop, I was just doing regular circular, where I then had this cord that I would have to like pull out and then pull, and I felt like I was always having to like pull out and move and readjust my stitches on the circular one, and I always had this cord that I was having to pull that I felt like would stretch out my stitches in different places. And I don't know, I'm finishing a sweater sleeve, which I wish I had over here, and due to laziness and not having double points with me when I started the sleeve, I'm now down on the cuff. And so that's exactly the battle I'm in, is I'm on this little cuff and I'm like wrestling with this circular needle cord that I'm pulling in and out. And it's aggravating me, which is why when we started this sock knit along, I was like, I'm doing this thing on double points. Because with double points, for me anyhow, it's key. You don't ever have to wrestle with the cord in or out. I'm just knitting from needle to needle. So it's more of a flow for me, because I think that's what any of us want when we're knitting. So it's whatever your preference is you're wanting the good flow of not having to start and stop all the time. So, like I said, for me, I used to knit a lot of beanie hats for people, and especially in the car, and I can get car sick. So I needed something that I could definitely like have flow for and not have to start and stop. But just see, as you're watching me do this and I'm not paying as much attention to the fact that I'm filming, see, I'm just moving the stitches. And then really, like I said, I guess one of my biggest suggestions is just push the rest of your needles. See how I always kind of get them behind that other hand. Like get your other needles kind of behind your fingers, and then just let them kind of sit there. And that way you're not, like if you're trying to keep them all perfect, like then your hand, is all in the way and herky-jerky, and you definitely get into octopus wrestling that way. So tuck all the tentacles down, and just focus on your two action needles, as we'll call them. And then if you do have to put it down, like you have to go pee or refill your coffee cup, nothing is worse than coming back and being like, man, I lost my 5th needle. And then you have to dig through the sofa cushions and everything, which I already had to do this morning. So if you have to stop to go get something to eat or drink or go to the bathroom, make sure, I always try to stop kind of in the middle of a row where I have all 5 needles with stitches on them, and then you can just lay it down and walk off from it. And then when you pick it up, it's right back where it was. Whereas if you finished this row and then you had this needle like naked out here by itself, like then it's real bad about losing one. And then if you accidentally sit down on it, you jab yourself in the hip, which I happen to know from personal experience. So you don't want one of these floating around in your sofa, is my point. So yeah, in between, and same thing with your knitting bag. Anytime I stop knitting on double points, I try to stop knitting kind of with it just like this. So that way they're all contained. So on that note, I think I'm going to have to stop knitting. It's been a fun morning. Been hanging out here with Jolene. It's been real rainy. As you can see, she's very stressed out about it. And been calling this work for this morning. I've gotten tired of doing all the other things that are more like work. So I decided this morning my work was going to be catching up on this sock knit along, because everybody else is way further along than me. So anywho, I need to go get dressed, and I will have to put this lovely project down, and I hope that's helped. So anyhow, I will talk to you soon.